Thank you very much, Michael. There are some people I would like to thank for having me here today. Michael, his family, all the organizers who made this event possible, Dr. Katsonis, who came from Cyprus, Eleni, Jose and his team, and if I forgot someone, that's just my old brain. How is the translation? Is it good? Can you hear me, understand everything? All right. I will be talking in English, but I heard that the evening will be produced on a DVD, and I assume that then the lecture will also be translated into the Greek language with subtitles, so you can use it and show it. When I prepared this evening here, I decided that we need to go beyond what you heard in my YouTube presentation. We are having elections here in Greece, and there are only two parties. One party, the big Brussels party, and then there are those who say, we don't want this. I gave my lecture the title, Freedom or Slavery, Democracy or Dictatorship, because that's what we're talking about. And there is a role for Greece, for Italy, for Spain, not just to overcome this crisis, but to take the lead towards a new Europe. That's why I'm here tonight. What we will be talking about, the birth hour of the chemical pharmaceutical cartel, the cartel's first attempt of world conquest, the cartel's second attempt of world conquest, which was World War II, the cartel's third attempt of world conquest, the Brussels EU, and then the responsibility we all share to change that. Let's talk first about how it all started. How come that we are in this situation? We have to go back more than a century. In fact, if we really want to go to the roots of the problem, we have to go back to this picture. This is the hand of our ancestors eating fruits, eating vegetables, eating natural products that benefited their health. For thousands of generations, they benefited from the vitamins, minerals, phytobiologicals in these ingredients. It was the essence of health, essence of life. No one questioned that because that's just how it was. But about 150 years ago, some scientists decided they want to know more. And they decided to analyze the plants. They decided to analyze nature. This is a willow tree. And this is the substance in the bark of the willow tree. And they found out how this substance is actually built from the atoms. They modified it a little bit so they could do what? They could patent it. And here is who they were. That's aspirin, a product of nature taken by some scientists and a company and marketed now for more than 100 years, making huge profits from robbing nature. This is just one example. This is the German Chemical Society's annual here, 1897. Actually, I brought this book with me today. It is like a sorcerer's handbook. On every page, you see structures, molecules, atoms, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, and the composition of that. That was like a Lego game. How many nitrogen molecules? How many carbon molecules? And the list goes on and on. This is just 1 year. The total series of books you can see here. The knowledge they had already 120 years ago was incredible. They knew tens of thousands of molecules, most derived from nature, at a time when the rest of Europe was essentially an agrarian landscape. Imagine that feeling of these people, to be in control of nature. So they decided it's no longer enough that we know these things. We want to own them. In order to own nature, you need a document and a stamp. That's called a patent. So analysis, robbing things from nature, and patenting, meaning appropriating nature, became the basis of 3 companies, Bayer, BASF, and Höchst. There were some smaller companies too, but these were growing rapidly because this knowledge, patented, was worth millions of, as they called it, mark at the time. Today they would say euros. And over the decades they said, well, maybe it's not enough if we own these things. We want to own the world. That was the beginning. That's why I call it the Sorcerer's Handbook. For these people to have the idea to conquer the world. And basically expand their patent politics to the rest of Europe and to the rest of the world. And if you enforce patent politics, the patent law, if you enforce that, you own that country. We are not just talking about books and Lego games. We are also talking about real people. This is Bayer CEO Karl Duisberg. In 1904, he wrote a memorandum telling the entire chemical companies in Germany, we need to unite if we want to conquer the world. So in his memorandum from 1904, the goal was to establish the rule of the German chemical industry over the entire world. End quote. That was the basis. To conquer the planet. When I was understanding these things, I couldn't read this somewhere because no one had written about it before. When I understood that, I realized these people must have felt like God or like the gods. Nothing else. They were able to understand things that no one understood in the history of mankind. And they decided to own it. And they decided to be the gods for the entire world. That was not so easy because first you needed to impose the patent laws from Germany onto other countries. They were not eager to have those. So you needed to help with this gentleman here, German Emperor Wilhelm. So here is the strategist, Karl Duisberg, and his accomplice, Emperor Wilhelm II. So together they decided, well, we should just try it. We should just try to militarily conquer the world, then impose the patent laws and rule it from there on. There was the emperor, and there was also a chancellor who was like the boss of the parliament in Germany at that time. Parliament was there as a fig leaf for the emperor, but nevertheless, the declaration of war was signed by this gentleman together with Wilhelm. The war was 6 weeks old when this man stated, the German chancellor at the time stated, what they are really after in this war. And I'm reading, our goal is to enforce a Central European Economic Union with joint custom regulations that includes France, Belgium, Holland, Denmark, etc., Austria, Hungary, Poland, which didn't even exist at that time, and potentially Italy, Sweden, and Norway. This union, and this is an original quote, under German leadership, has to stabilize the economic dominance of Germany over Central Europe. World War I. 100 years ago. You could say, let's move on. That's a long time ago. I'm here to say, don't. You need to understand things if you want to change them. And the strategists, they not just said, hey, Emperor, lead that war. They also provided the tools to win it. In 1910, 4 years before World War I started, this gentleman, Fritz Haber, invented a process to take air and produce bombs. It's called nitrogen fixation. I'm repeating. These guys were able to take air and build explosives from air. Fantastic. And suddenly war became got a complete new dimension. That was BASF. Now we are talking about Bayer. Bayer couldn't stay behind, so they invented mustard gas. Dr. Katsonis talked about it before. And it was first used as a chemical weapon in World War I by Bayer, the largest pharmaceutical company in the world at that time, parading as the Mother Teresa on this planet, but in reality, that's who they were. So we summarize. World War I was the first attempt of the chemical cartel at the military conquest of the world to create one single worldwide market for patented chemical and pharmaceutical products. More than 16 million soldiers and civilians died. More than 20 million were wounded in this attempt at the global conquest. As we all know, it didn't work. 1918 was the year of defeat. Interestingly, it was just a defeat for one party of this coalition, namely the emperor. He had to resign. He got asylum in the Netherlands. These guys here, they stayed. They blamed it all on the emperor. Bad guy. And 8 years after this defeat, in 1926, Bayer, BASF, Hoechst, and some smaller chemical companies of Germany became one company, one incorporated. And they gave themselves a name, IG Farben, which means dye, Interessensgemeinschaft Farben, interest group Farben, Incorporated. Huge thing. Company value, 11 billion Reichsmark. That's roughly times 100 today in euros, and more than 80,000 employees. The largest chemical conglomerate on this planet. Aha. Here we have it. That is not me saying so. That is how they call themselves. Talking about self-awareness and self-esteem. And of course, if you build such a thing, such a giant corporations, you want to do something with it. So, lo and behold, they were investing not in another emperor, but in a political party. And we all know who they were, the Nazis. By 1933, IG Farben was the world's largest chemical and pharmaceutical company and the largest financier of the Nazi rise to power. These are documents from the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal records against IG Farben. There was a tribunal after 1945 just against the directors of IG Farben in Nuremberg. Did you know that? I doubt it, because hardly anyone knew about it. Billions have been spent to just make those records disappear. I'll show you some of them in the next slides. This is one of them. It shows that BASF, Bayer, Hoechst, IG Farben financed the Nazis with more than 80 million Reichsmark, which is about 800 million euros in today's currency. They really wanted it. Adolf Hitler, 1936, 3 months before the Summer Olympics in Berlin, 3 years before World War II started. He says, "The European people are part of one family in this world. It is not prudent to think that it will be possible to maintain this community of nations inside a diverse legal system and within different legal values." He didn't say, "We want war for destruction." He said, "We want war for conquest." And these were the politicians. They were the front men, and behind the scenery were lawyers. One of them was Walter Hallstein, a leading lawyer of the Nazi cartel regime. He participated in the negotiations between the Nazis and fascist Mussolini about how Europe would look after they conquered it. That took place in 1938, that meeting. In early 1939, 6 months before the launch of World War II, Walter Hallstein publicly outlines the new laws, how the Nazi cartel coalition would rule the conquered nations of the world after a victorious World War II. All civil laws, all criminal laws. If you want to read it, this speech, I recommend you this book. It's available in Greek outside. We'll meet this man again tonight. Another of these technocrats, these legal technocrats, who early on were planning the post-World War II Europe, and for that matter, world, in legal terms. His name was Hans Maria Globke. His function was a plenipotentiary of the Nazi cartel coalition for administrative law in occupied Europe. So these guys, they had institutions and they had responsibilities of studied lawyers making plans how future Europe under the cartel's rule would look like. And he was coordinating it. This is the man here. This is, by the way, Reinhard Heydrich, who was a symbol of death for the Jews, for the Slavs, for just about any culture that was not Aryan. And he was a symbol of acquisition for anything that IG Farben wanted in Europe. Picture was taken in Prague in 1941. Remember this face. And then we had the Politburo, the liaison office of these interests in Berlin. Huge complex. Oops. Huge complex. This is where IG Farben coordinated their interest in World War II. They were there in the countries of Europe long before the Wehrmacht invaded it, because they did business there. So all their business entities were in fact espionage operations, and they knew exactly in which countries to go, which raw materials to rob, which companies to take. All of that was coordinated right here. Excuse me, the Nazis, they didn't have the know-how for any of this. It required this apparatus to plan a huge undertaking of conquering an entire continent. And of course, almost all explosives, oil, rubber, and other supplies for the Wehrmacht were produced by IG Farben during their second attempt at world conquest. IG Farben produced explosives to open new markets in the Netherlands. They produced the explosive to open new markets in France. They wanted to open new markets in your country, in Greece. After the conquest of France in 1940, IG Farben headquarters sent a letter to the Nazi government making proposals how the future of Europe would look like. Imagine. Document from the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal against IG Farben. Here is what they say. We want a European economic union, no customs anymore. Under the leadership of the Nazi IG Farben coalition, we want to make sure that the position of the German patent, this is the title of this letter, the German patent needs to be valid in all occupied countries. They didn't say, we want this or that company. By the way, they robbed most of the chemical companies in Europe. They said, we want you, the Nazi government, to make sure that our patents are honored in all occupied countries so we can own them. Then comes this place, Auschwitz. Did you know, well, I'm sure you knew about the concentration camp, but did you know that 7 kilometers from the concentration camp Auschwitz was the largest industrial plant of wartime Europe? And it was called IG Auschwitz, and it was a 100% subsidiary of Bayer, BASF, Höchst, and other German chemical companies. 100%. 24 square kilometers. You can see the territory was larger than those concentration camps together. And now we understand what happened here. This was a slave labor camp. Later on, with more and more people being shipped to Auschwitz, it became a slave labor extermination camp, which means that the people were sent, those who could work, to construct this huge plant here. If they fell sick, they went to the ovens of Auschwitz. That's called slave labor extermination. Under the auspices, under the knowledge of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world at that time. Why am I making these points so clear? We are often asked, you know, Dr. Rath, your criticism on the pharmaceutical company is a little bit strong. It is impossible that someone risks the lives of millions of people for profit. I say, well, they've done it before. And that's why we need to talk about it. And then we are told, those bad SS people, they did this in human experiments in the concentration camps. These SS people were criminals, but they were idiots too. They never had the knowledge to develop drugs to be tested. Nuremberg War Crime Tribunal, another document. These are ampules tested on innocent Auschwitz victims. Bayer, IG Farben Aktiengesellschaft. A picture from Nuremberg Tribunal. And you can see it has no name, this drug. Why does it have no name? Why is it called preparation BE1034? What do you think? That's a patent code. These were patented substances, and here you see the patent for these drugs, owned by IG Farben and developed by Bayer. So we have to understand that Bayer IG Farben pharmaceutical products were tested in the concentration camps and sold to the world. More than 200 patented drugs were at that time in the arsenal of Bayer. Not all of them, obviously, were tested in the concentration camp. Most of them were already on the market. One new category, though, that was tested in the concentration camp was called chemotherapy. This is the U.S. Chief Prosecutor Telford Taylor in the Nuremberg Tribunal against IG Farben. He summarized his pleadings in one sentence. Without IG Farben, World War II would not have been possible. And I'm adding, without this, without patents, World War II would never have happened, because there was no economic incentive to bring the Nazis to power in the first place. As I mentioned before, these are not resistance fighters. These are the directors of Bayer, BASF, and Höchst in Nuremberg. This is Fritz Termeer. In 1948, he was found guilty of genocide, slavery, plundering, and other war crimes, especially in connection with what happened in Auschwitz. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison. And I couldn't help to make that statement. Here you have The director, the CEO, the head of the world's largest pharmaceutical company at that time, sentenced for mass murder, genocide, slavery, war crimes. For those of you who want to read more about this, I have to cut it short here. There's much more to be said. But this is an interesting book written by a person who researched this area, Joseph Borkin's book, The Crime and Punishment of IG Farben. We put it online under profitoverlife.org. You just click important books online and you can browse through this. So we summarize. Just as World War I, so was World War II, an attempt by the same interests, the chemical pharmaceutical cartel, to conquer the world. This time, more than 60 million people paid this attempt with their lives. So, you think they gave up? I can assure you they did not. This gentleman is Karl Wurster. During World War II, he was responsible for a subsidiary of IG Farben called German Pesticide Association, Deutsche Gesellschaft für Schädlingsbekämpfung. He was one of their directors. He was responsible for the production of Cyclone B for the Auschwitz gas chambers. So IG Farben produced that stuff and shipped it there. Did that prevent him from taking over a responsible role afterwards? Of course not. It looks like a qualification for post-World War II German industry. He became the head of BASF after World War II. Remember this man? The plenipotentiary of the administrative laws of Nazi cartel-occupied Europe. He became the second man in the German state after World War II, head of the German chancellery. You know, we have a chancellor as a head. At that time it was Adenauer, and the person behind him was this man who had been designing how the world would look under the control of the Nazi IG Farben cartel. And you may think, oh, well, okay, he was behind the chancellor, so the chancellor could correct things. It was exactly the opposite. This man built the position of head of chancellery in Germany as the key political position. So the chancellor is just a facade. The guy who really is pulling the strings is this man. He is responsible for context coordination with all political parties, the foreign service, no appointment anywhere, no appointment of diplomats anywhere without this man deciding. Secret Service, European Union expansion. I marked it in yellow here so that we are not forgetting that. Government, PRs. And he was head of what is called a discretionary fund, which no one knows what it is. It's just money that comes in from the gods? Maybe. So we have to learn that from 1949 to 1963, during the decisive years of post-war Germany and the foundation of the EU, this plenipotentiary was the key architect. And no wonder that West Germany at that time and today Germany became the first cartel state from day one in history. We talked about the other attorney Walter Hallstein, who negotiated with the Mussolini attorneys about dividing Europe between the Nazis and the Italian fascists. Where do we find him again? Well, we find him here sitting beside German Chancellor Adenauer in Rome in 1957, signing the foundation documents for the European Union in Brussels. There were only two, the Chancellor and him. You can see those documents in here. And of course, if there's such a wonderful group re-emerging, this gentleman, Fritz de Meer, cannot be left out. Yes, he spent some years in prison. Yes, he was a war criminal. But after all, aren't we all criminals in Germany? So they had him back. And not just as a retired person who is living from a pension fund. No, he became head of the flagship of German industry in post-World War Germany, which was Bayer again. Chairman of the board. And 1956 was the year when the decision was taken to found the European Union. So they needed this man. And so there's no surprise that if you have those kind of characters being the architects of the Brussels EU as we know it today, that this comes out. The decisions are taken by the same interests we've been talking about now, the oil and drug cartel. They decide who is going to be one of those 27 EU commissioners. Not you. Or did any of you vote for an EU commissioner in your life? Do you ever have the possibility to vote one of them out of office? Yet this EU Commission has the monopoly on legislation. The Parliament that is being presented to you as the big democratic part in Brussels is a joke. They have no rights to initiate legislation, which is a hallmark of democracy. You need to know this when one of the politicians of your country comes to you and says, oh, the Brussels EU is such a fantastic thing because we are finally, after 2 world wars, we are finally all coming together and there will be no more war if you support this thing in Brussels. It's the opposite. These 27 people, you may think, they can't do much harm. After all, they're so busy and they are only infrequently over there in Brussels. Most of the time they hang around in Athens or in Madrid or in Berlin. Maybe. Yes, and 27 is a low number. But they have an apparatus at their disposal of currently 54,000 paid technocrats. Not elected, paid. By whom? You may guess. So, by the way, we have 27 commissioners and 54,000 technocrats, and here we have about 627, what do we call them? Fig leaf personnel, people who come back to Athens and tell you it's all fine in Brussels. I guess that's their main role. And this picture, more than any other picture, shows you what it is about the Brussels EU. This is the number of patents that have been filed per country. Just to translate this, D stands for Germany, Deutschland. NL for the Netherlands, France, Great Britain, Switzerland, Italy. Ah. And if you look at the finances of this construct, who paid the building of this monster, it's pretty much reflecting this relationship. Most of the money came from these guys because they have the biggest benefit. And let me tell you something. If someone comes to you and say, oh, you know, we need to be grateful that we are getting these billions of financial support here. None of these people is giving you 1 cent if they do not get back 1,000 euros for that 1 cent. So we have to understand that today the same interests that made World War I and II are conducting their third attempt at world conquest via the economic, political, and military construct of the Brussels EU as its operative base. And of course, this is just a platform. They are now influencing world politics from their construct. They're going to the United Nations and say, we want a seat. These people there, unelected. They go there and say, oh, we represent Europe. They go to South America, and there is an association of states that are doing trade business together, Mercosur, and they say, you need to reform your organization. You need to copy the Brussels model. And they're doing, in Africa, they already succeeded. They just paid the politicians in poor Africa to copy the Brussels model. So none of the people in Africa will ever have a chance to vote on these people. So it's the platform for what? Brussels is the platform of the cartel for exactly what we were talking about for the last 45 minutes, world conquest. You look at this picture, and the only thing you're missing are bombs. And then we need to talk about the leaders of today. And we have Bayer and we have BASF in Germany. You remember these two were two of the responsible companies for World War II, for Auschwitz and World War I, too. The third one, Höchst, was swallowed by Sanofi under the mediation of this man. He was not president at that time when he took 55 billion of taxpayer money in France and gave it to Sanofi to acquire Höchst. Sanofi was a little dwarf. Höchst was a giant. So the dwarf swallowed the giant with Sarkozy's 55 billion. So the career of this man is entirely dependent on the continuation of the pharmaceutical business with disease. We briefly have to touch on that. I don't have the time to go into more details, but one of the key elements of this third attempt at world conquest without weapons is dependency. And before you are able to make people dependent, you need to make them poor. How do you make them poor? You sell them something that is exactly the opposite of what they tell you it is. And these are pharmaceutical drugs. 42% of all the drugs currently sold, prescribed, taken by the people in Greece, including by some of you here, are potentially cancerogenic. 42%. You think this is an exception? Think twice. Patents. You cannot patent natural substances. You have to have synthetic substances to get a patent because it needs to be new. So what do? You invent substances for the body that the body never seen. And they are what? Toxic to the cells. So the principle of patenting, the principle at the very bottom of the pharmaceutical business is actually not healing you, but is creating markets. In this case, disease markets. You need to understand that. And then they come along and put pressure on the governments in Athens and says, hey guys, you got to pay for our drugs. Now, listen to this. You have a marketing model that causes ever more diseases. And you make the governments, not just in Greece, but also in Spain and the world, you make them pay for this spiral of ever-increasing diseases. A fantastic business model. It accomplishes exactly what you need. Gradual impoverishment. Not just of the people, but of the governments. And if we look around, healthcare costs are the single largest burden of your economy and of all economies. So that's, in a nutshell, the business with disease and why I'm so critical on that. Because they knew from day one what they're doing. They were promoting diseases behind the mask of providing healthcare. They were draining the national economies through forced imports of patented drugs from, we know from where. They bankrupt entire nations with that business model. And then the last step, and of course this is the intended, from the very onset, the intended step, is the political takeover of entire continents. And it's huge amounts. $1 trillion worldwide is currently the amount of pharmaceutical drug sales. But that's not all. Another $1 trillion goes out for the indirect costs. If you fall sick from these drugs, if you have to be retired early, all these costs amount to another $1 trillion each year. We're coming to the last chapter, and you may say, oh my God, after what we've just seen, after this monster, what can we as a small nation do? Wait. It's not a question of whether it can be done, it's a question how much you, every single one of you, how much we want it. That's the only question. And if we need additional motivation in a country where democracy has its birthplace, if we look at the democracy movements of an entire continent over centuries, all of that gone with the Treaty of Lisbon, you don't need additional motivation. If we look at the number of people who died in Greece fighting these interest groups in World War II, but not just here, in the world over, all of that in vain, we're just giving in? Never. So here are the arguments why we will win. because we have superior technology. What is this? Well, in the area of energy, the cartel is promoting oil, fossil energy, nuclear energy more recently, because they want to control it. They want to control society with that. But we have the technology available to beat that with renewable energies. In healthcare, they are telling you patented synthetic drugs, that's modern medicine. We say this is outdated stuff. Modern medicine is science-based natural health. As you saw it in the contribution from Dr. Katsonis. It was not pharmaceutical drugs that made those tumors disappear. These were natural substances. So what does it bring you? What does it bring every single person to bet on this horse here, on new superior technologies? Well, about 10 to 15% of the total costs of living of each person he or she spends for energy, driving the car, etc., heating the house. Healthcare, it's also 10 to 15%. So between 20 and 30% of the money you have in your pocket can be saved if you support this new direction. When I came here, I read that Greece has more than 330 days of sunshine each year. What about that? That's liberation. That's independence. We've seen those pictures. Superior technology. The natural disappearance of tumors, is not achieved with any pharmaceutical drug. You need to understand the mechanisms of cell regulation with biological molecules in order to affect what these cells do. The same in cardiovascular disease. We haven't been able to talk about that today, but the same goes for coronary heart disease, the cause of heart attacks. Here you see a patient, 51 years old. This is a deposit in the coronary artery. 1 year later, same patient, same heart, same coronary artery. The deposits are gone. Not with bypass surgery, but by inducing self-regulation of the cells that make up these arteries. So implementing new energy and health technologies is the only way to prevent nearly 3 out of 4 diseases, save millions of lives and billions in healthcare costs, to solve the current economic crisis, to break the chains of economic dependency for future generations, to provide for every person direct savings of 20 to 30% in cost of living and up to 50% if the indirect savings are included. It goes on. Implementation of these new technologies will mean cuts for corporations in healthcare and social welfare expenses, as well as in energy costs. And that, of course, will contribute to the creation of millions of new jobs across Europe, not just here. And last, and perhaps most importantly, it will provide for every nation savings in healthcare and social expenses of 20 to 30% plus 50 to 80% of savings in interest and debt payment. Because if you have a constant drainage of your national economy in a healthcare hole that goes to Bayer, BASF, and Glaxo and others, you need to plug that hole. Otherwise, you'll be strangulated just from repaying the debts from this model. And eventually, of course, end the political dependency and save democracy. And here's another reason, for me, even more important than the technical superiority, is our ethical and our moral strength. Who are these interest groups that are our opponent in this battle? They are responsible for 2 world wars with 100 million people dying, hundreds of millions of patients who have been dying from preventable diseases during the last decades. They are responsible for the ruin of economies of essentially all nations on this planet. And then it's us. We want to live in a peaceful world. We want to prevent and eradicate diseases. And we want to protect our planet through use of renewable energy and pass this planet over to the next generation, not in bankruptcy, but with pride. That's just one slide. When you read about Dr. Rath in the internet, you are not reading a lot of compliments. Why is that? Well, if you would be the cartel and you would see the impact of the internet, wouldn't that be where you invest your money to play the game? Of course you would. And so if you look at Wikipedia, it's there to confuse and to deceive. Under the pretext of being a democratic tool, everyone can. Well, maybe everyone can, but unless you're not attacking the pharmaceutical cartel. So if you want to know more about our response to these attacks, you can go to this page, and I think Michael was talking about that earlier. We need to understand something very basic. The cartel interests, after what you heard tonight, and this message is spreading the world over, it's impossible that these interests can survive. It is impossible that the Brussels EU, once the people of the world learn what you've learned tonight, can survive. It's impossible that the euro can survive. As the economic chain, as I expressed it in my YouTube talk, it's impossible. So what are the options left for the cartel? If I'm saying this is impossible that they can survive, what are their last-minute possibilities to continue their domination of this planet? That is their last option. And that's why I'm so concerned about people like Sarkozy, about the outcome of the next election in the US, about the fact that Netanyahu is at the same time the best connected man to the pharmaceutical industry in his entire state. That's why I'm so concerned about that. And if you didn't know it, the cartel is seeking, the Lisbon Treaty is actually opening the way for an army run by the Brussels EU that includes control and command over nuclear weapons. Just a question of time if we let these guys go, that they do this. Just a question of time. And that is why our mission towards the economic liberation from the dictatorship of the Brussels EU is inseparable from our responsibility for world peace. You cannot divide those two. The liberation of mankind, and that's exactly where we are at this point, not just in Greece, in principle, has to be fought against this threat. What are our strategic goals? If we understand the role of patents as the cartel's key tool to rule the world, and we've talked about that, not just on chemical drugs, but also GMO food is done because of patents. If we understand that the patents of the chemical cartel have been the ultimate cause for 2 world wars, for the death of millions of patients, for the ruin of private and national economies, and for the current global crisis. If we understand this picture, that the massacre of Greek children in World War II and a leukemia child, or actually millions of leukemia childs today, that there is a bridge between the two. And that bridge has the name patents written all over. If we understand that, we need to have a long-term goal, and that is to ban a global ban of all patents, at least in the areas of health, life, and nutrition. It has to stop. It has to stop. And this is why we initiated the movement of life as an umbrella, a long-term goal for everyone who wants to help. We are not there, far away at this point, but we will be there with your help. Who is behind the movement of life? Two of the people who were the first signatories of this call to ban patents for life are survivors of this site that we talked about today, the Auschwitz concentration camp. August Kowalczyk with prison number 6804, very early, and Jerzy Ulatowski, prison number 192,823. They did this. When August Kowalczyk met us for the first time, he said, for more than 60 years, I have been asking, why me? Why was it me who escaped from Auschwitz? And why did millions of others die there? Why me? And when I met your mission, I got the answer. And I leave this thought with you tonight. I don't know whether we're going to be seeing each other again here in this site and with this composition of people. But I want you to take this home. Now that you've heard all this, what is your role? What is your responsibility? Strategic goal number 2, end the tyranny of the Brussels EU. Get out of the Brussels EU. People of Greece, get out. Get out, people of Spain, get out. Refuse the euro. I've said it before, it may be a slow recovery because they will retaliate if you do that. But you will keep your nation and you will keep your dignity. And in the end, you will get prosperity. If you follow their path, you will get none of that. And not just for the election in Greece now, for any election that's coming up in Europe, I'm saying every responsible citizen has to vote for parties that honor democracy and are not just claqueurs for the construct that is currently being built in Brussels. Michael will be talking about a more practical campaign for those who are interested in the health aspect, which is the cancer-free campaign. We all share responsibility now for the people of our nation, for the people of Europe, and for your children and grandchildren, and for all future generations. If we don't stop it now, they will not be able to reverse this. The people of Greece, and I'm repeating, share a particular responsibility because this town is the birthplace of democracy. And imagine what a signal it will be if you say, because of that, because of that. We are determined to fight. What an example you will create for the rest of Europe, for other nations that are in a similar situation, under attack of these interests. I'm at the end of my talk. Considering the threat of the cartel to the entire world, the people all over the world must unite behind these goals: freedom instead of slavery, and democracy instead of dictatorship. Thank you very much.